Boldwood presents Christmas Every Day. Written by Beth Moran and read by Helen Keeley. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue, 22nd of December. It was finally here. The highlight of the Dougal and Duff calendar. Everyone would be there, from the lowliest admin assistant to the senior partners. The oak banisters were draped with ivy, dotted with twinkling red and white fairy lights. The doorway, leading into the designated party room, was framed with pine branches, a cheeky sprig of mistletoe hanging in the centre. Inside, the room looked even more spectacular than last year. Hundreds of sparkling snowflakes dangled from the wood-panelled ceiling. More fairy lights and greenery adorned every surface. The Christmas tree, in the centre of the back wall, stood festooned with baubles and ribbons. Waiting staff slipped between the clusters of office cliques, with trays of champagne and crumbly canapés, their black uniforms in sharp contrast to the glittering party dresses and tartan finery. A swing quartet thrummed, but it couldn't beat the buzz of festive gossip. Rumours had been flying that the newest partner, Richard Abernethy, freshly returned from yet another victory in the Paris office, had been dropping hints about an important announcement. And when a locally renowned jeweller delivered a ring-shaped box to reception that morning, every one of the 63 employees knew within minutes. The only question was who. Nobody had a clue. That was, except me. The other PAs assumed I must have some insight to the mystery woman, given that I'd almost unlimited access to his emails and diary. They spent most of the evening trying to badger me into giving them a name, or at least a list of suspects. I smoothed down my ridiculously expensive dress, patted my hair, took another fake nonchalant swig of champagne, and said nothing. Not because of loyalty to my boss, although that would have been reason enough. Taut with nerves, heart fluttering, resisting the urge to wash the dryness from my mouth with another drink, I not so surreptitiously watched my secret boyfriend and soon-to-be fiancé across the room and wished he'd hurry up and get on with it. I had always dreaded Christmas, particularly these last few years when it had simply been another day alone, opening the same gift cards sent by my dad and watching someone else's television, waiting to hear from Richard, despite him telling me that he'd probably not get a moment to call. But this year, surely I'd be spending it on his family's estate in the Highlands. I had already planned the clothes I would pack and spent a frantic afternoon searching for the perfect last-minute gifts for his parents and younger brother. For the first time, in so long that it made my heart ache just thinking about it, I would be spending Christmas with a loving, happy family. I took a deep breath, smothered my smile, and, for the millionth time that day, silently practiced my surprised, thrilled, and senior partner's wife-worthy yes. Chapter 1. When the house had been described as like something out of a fairy tale, I'd been picturing Snow White's cottage or a quaint gingerbread house, minus the evil witch, whom I'd left behind in Edinburgh. Not a shrunken, grottier version of Sleeping Beauty's derelict outhouse. And in my storybook, there hadn't been an old pram, 2 sagging armchairs, and a turquoise toilet blocking the driveway. I peered through the taxi window, trying to kid myself it would look better once I was out of the car. Or it had stopped raining. Or if I took my glasses off. The driver pulled up in front of a rusted mangle. "Could you get any closer to the door?" I asked, tugging the zip a bit higher on my jacket. He swiveled his head to look at me, one eyebrow raised. "What about parking on the lawn?" "That ain't a lawn. It's a jungle. I ain't risking my tyres on that." I blew out a sigh and unbuckled the seatbelt. £50. What? My hand froze halfway to my purse. We agreed 30.
That was before the Ford, the mud pit, and the overgrown branches scratching my paintwork. The car needs a full-on valet and the extra won't even cover it. I've got standards to uphold.
I cast my eyes around the faded upholstery, scuffed trimmings, and air freshener designed as a topless woman. You knew the address was on an unnamed road in the middle of a forest and you still said 30. I tried to keep the tremble out of my voice. The extra £20 might not pay for a car valet, but it would help me not starve for the next couple of weeks.
I'm the only taxi driver round here who'll come out this far, he grinned. The big bad wolf. I'm the only taxi, full stop. If you want out of here any time soon, best stay in my good books.
He tipped his head towards the house.
And trust me, you won't be wanting to hang around.
Are you threatening me? I did my best to channel some of the experience I'd gained working for sharks who'd sell your own baby back to you, and straightened my shoulders. After enduring a lifetime of being treated like a worthless wimp, this was supposed to be a fresh start. The new, improved, over-it Jenny. I opened my purse and deliberately placed 3 notes on the plastic leads between the front and back seats. I'm giving you the £30 you asked for and not a penny more. He curled up one side of his lip, leant towards me and growled.
Are you sure about that?
Letting out a squeak, I unclasped my purse again. And a tip, of course. Here, I'll make it 20. Yanking open the door, I tumbled out into the freezing January rain, slipping and sliding round to the car boot. Hauling out my suitcase, followed by a rucksack, I stumbled out of the way just in time to avoid injury, but not a generous splattering of filthy spray from the revving wheels. Wiping a smear of mud off my glasses with a sodden sleeve, I stared at my new home. A semi-detached, old woodsman's cottage. The grey plaster frontage streaked with grime. Slumped chimney and patchy roof confirmed it hadn't worn the years well. I squelched through the puddles, rucksack on my back, hand-me-down Mulberry suitcase dragging behind, and peered in, through the ivy-smothered front window. Rummaging in my jacket pocket for the key, I gave up attempting to make out shapes in the gloom beyond. Right, might as well get it over with, get out of this rain and put the kettle on. I wiped the worst of the dirt from the keyhole, congratulating myself for having had the foresight to have the utilities reconnected before I arrived, and forced the key in, slowly wiggling it until it unlocked. I pushed against the door. Nothing. Not even a rattle. Turning the key back to the original position, I tried again. As water ran in icy rivulets down my face and up my sleeves, I did everything I could to make the door budge. Pounding, shoulder barging, kicking, taking a slippery running charge like the cops in films. After a while, determined not to start crying, I dumped my luggage and precariously stepped along the front of the house to see if I could get around the back. No good. More bushes, the rain dripping off 2-inch thorns. I glanced over at the adjoining cottage. There, none of the windows were cracked, and the garden didn't look as though it had been abandoned by a rag and bone man. Maybe I could sleep in there instead, just for tonight. According to my mother, the whole building had lain empty for years. There wasn't much demand for cottages in the middle of nowhere, unless done up as holiday lets, and no one wanted to holiday next door to a scrap heap. I cautiously moved closer, trying to peek beyond the closed blinds before looking through the letterbox, but the approaching dusk made it too dark to see. I tramped along a brick path, around to the back. Here, things appeared much the same. A wooden picnic bench sat forlornly on a patch of weed-riddled gravel about 6 feet square. Beyond that, my half of the building was nearly hidden where the forest had encroached right up to the house in a twist of branches and brambles. I might be able to squeeze through to the back door. I should at least attempt to squeeze through to the back door. But then again, it would probably rip my jeans, and this was the only pair that fitted. And if I scratched my face, it would be harder to find a job, and then how could I survive here? I probably didn't even have any phone reception, so I couldn't call anyone if I tripped on a stray root and impaled myself on the thorns. I quickly checked my phone, not wondering even for a second whether Richard had been trying to send me any grovelling messages, admitting it was all a terrible mistake. See? No signal. It would be reckless and foolish to force my way into that tangle of spikes. I shuddered, glancing at the shadows looming around me, I imagined the kinds of animals that prowled Sherwood Forest once darkness fell. They'd find my broken body, drawn to fresh meat by the scent of blood leaking from 1,000 puncture wounds. I wouldn't stand a chance. And even if I could call that taxi bloke for help, he probably wouldn't come. If only there were a dry, empty, nearby dwelling place for me to take refuge in, just to get me through the night until the rain stopped. I stood, hesitant, and pondered whether I had the guts to go for it. I didn't ponder for long. I was too cold, wet, muddy, hungry, and bone-shatteringly tired to care about the law. If I got arrested, at least I'd have a dry place to sleep, and hopefully some breakfast. I hurried over to the cottage, said a quick prayer, and tried the door. Locked. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed a stone and bashed it through the door's frosted window. Preparing to carefully poke my hand through the hole, I nearly severed my wrist when a pair of arms grabbed me from behind. Pulling me away from the door, the arms wrestled me over to the picnic table and pushed me down face first until my top half lay in the pool of water collecting on the surface.
What the hell do you think you're doing?
The man held me down with a hand on each shoulder, preventing me from seeing him. Okay, so with my eyes closed and glasses fallen off, I wouldn't have been able to anyway, but still. His voice sounded rough, and strong, and mad as hell. I gasped, sucking in half a mouthful of rainwater from the tabletop, which I proceeded to choke on. As a frankly hideous retching sound emerged from my throat, the man quickly let go.
Whoa, if you're going to throw up, at least do it in the bushes, not on my bench.
I heaved myself upright and twisted around, one hand gripping the table, trying to stop my brain racing long enough to catch hold of a useful thought. Your bench?
Yes, my bench, my broken pane of glass, my house. So to repeat, what are you doing here?
But nobody lives here, I managed to rasp. The house is abandoned.
Does it look abandoned?
He asked, his voice getting louder. Can't see. Glasses. I felt around on the table in vain until he grunted in exasperation and bent down, before thrusting the rain-smeared glasses into my hand. I clutched them for a few raggedy breaths, a little scared to put them on and see the face matching that furious voice. It looked as bad as I had feared. Thick, dark eyebrows over eyes black with anger, and behind a bristling beard, a mouth twisted in disgust. I glanced at the house, fear shoved aside as temper sparked. My constant bodyguard these days. Yes, it does. No lights on, all overgrown, no car outside, and I was told nobody lived here.
And who told you that?
He folded his arms. My mother, the previous owner of the other house.
The owner died 6 years ago.
Yes, so the house went to her daughter, my mother, and as of last week it belongs to me, hence I have a key. I pulled the key out of my pocket and waved it at him.
If you have a key, what are you doing smashing my window?
I couldn't get the door open.
He raised his eyebrows, waiting for more.
So I came around the back, but I couldn't get to the door and it's nearly dark, everything I'm wearing is sopping wet, and the taxi driver stole my money. I took a long, deep breath. I would not cry in front of this man. I had vowed never to let a man think I was a pushover again. Come on, Jenny, buck up.
Tez's taxis.
I nodded, wiping a raindrop off my nose. He sighed.
The front door won't open from the outside. I'll hack a path to the back, and you can at least get out of the rain. Call round in the morning and I'll give you the name of a decent taxi firm before you go.
Go where?
Back to wherever you came from.
I gaped at him for a moment, vaguely registering that the rain had begun to ease. The background percussion replaced with the slow plop of water dripping off leaves, and the hiss of steam escaping both my ears. I'm not going anywhere. I live here now.
He looked me up and down. Trust me, you'll be leaving in the morning, if you last that long.
He nodded towards a brick outbuilding tucked under an oak tree.
I'll get hacking, but if the rain starts again, I'm stopping to board up my window.
Actually, it's fine, thank you. I can do my own hacking. I apologise about your window. Do send me the bill. Good day.
I marched as best I could back around the house, only losing my shoe once in the mud. Okay, fairy godmother. I reckon right about now would be a perfect time for you to show up. I scanned the woods, struggling to make out anything in the deepening gloom. After a good 10 minutes pulling branches aside, stamping them out of the way and ripping my hands to shreds in the process, I found a shed. It took only a few tries to smash the wood, encircling the lock to bits using a thick branch and the force of my anger. Nicely warmed up, somewhat exhilarated by my discovery, I stepped inside. Maybe a teensy bit unnerved by my neighbour's comments about only lasting a night, I decided to put off investigating the house until morning. In front of me appeared to be an excellent place to unroll my sleeping bag and seek a very welcome oblivion. Chapter 2. I awoke to the sound of scuffling. Something brushed against my cheek. Even with my eyes closed, I could sense the presence of something other. Fumbling for my glasses, I heard another scratching, skittering noise. Blood pounding in my skull, I carefully put my glasses on and snapped my eyes open. Ugh! Rat! Rats! More rats! It was not easy to scramble away from a swarm of giant, rabid, red-eyed rats while locked inside a Mini Cooper. Some flailing, screeching, howling, and a lot of garbled gibberish accompanied my desperate attempt to find the unlock button, push past the rat on the seat next to me, fall out onto the concrete shed floor, entangle myself in a sea of cobwebs, trip over my suitcase, fling open the shed door, fight my way through the bushes that had magically sprung back during the night, rip out a sizable chunk of hair on a branch, and collapse on the frozen earth. 3 seconds later, a rat sprinted 4 inches past my face and disappeared into the shadows. 30 seconds later, I was still wheezing like broken bagpipes when my world turned dark as something loomed in front of me, blocking out the early morning sun. And no prizes for guessing what, or who, that was, considering there were only 2 human beings to be found for several square miles. I couldn't see his face, having lost my glasses once more, but could hear his irritation.
Do you need help?
I pulled myself upright, tugging down the 3 jumpers I'd worn to avoid freezing to death while sleeping in a car. Smoothing my hair off my face, I dislodged a twig, a couple of oak leaves, and a massive beetle. Summoning up my last reserves of strength, I managed not to squeal again, merely gasping like a fish a few times while shaking my head to check nothing else lurked up there. I'm fine, thank you. I slipped in a puddle. I couldn't see it because I'd lost my glasses. As I finished speaking, he handed them to me for the second time. Placing them firmly on my nose, I straightened my spine, daring him to disbelieve me.
You lost your glasses walking out of a shed.
I stared right into his eyes, which looked chocolate brown in the wintry sunlight. Yes.
You slept in there?
That's my business. Shaking his head slightly, he began to walk away.
That's great. I don't want to know your business. I've got better things to do than come to your rescue every 5 minutes. How about next time you fall over, you do it a bit more quietly?
Next time, how about ignoring me? I didn't ask you to come to my rescue.
Fine. That's a deal. You're obviously perfectly capable of taking care of yourself.
Yes, I am. What made you think I wasn't? The fact I have breasts and long hair means I need taking care of, I shouted after him. He turned, frowning.
I can't say I'd noticed. But you're right. People lose their glasses and slip in dry puddles while walking out of sheds all the time. Good day.
I watched him stride away, non-existent retorts dissolving in my throat. Turning around to confirm that, yep, all traces of last night's puddles had dried up in the sunshine. I brushed a straggle of cobweb off my jeans and prepared to re-enter the shed to get my bags. It was only later that I registered that the man had worn no shoes and carried a cricket bat. He really had been coming to save me. No thanks. The whole reason I was here was to prove to my family, my ex-work colleagues, the slimeball Richard, and mostly myself, that I could take care of myself, which I would start doing that very day, once I'd found somewhere to empty my bladder and get a decent cup of coffee. The car didn't leave much room in the shed for anything else, but hung up around the walls were some gardening tools, various other pieces of worn-out clutter, and an ancient-looking black bike. As I had no key for the car, thankfully I had found it unlocked, avoiding the need to break another window, I decided the bike would be the best way to reach civilization before I died from caffeine withdrawal. To my great relief, despite the oil, rust, and flabby tyres, the bike was still rideable. I creaked along, feeling like a community nurse from the 1950s, following the frosty track back towards the lane and eventually the village beyond. After a few minutes, I spied a footpath leading off the track and into the forest with a signpost pointing to Middlebeck, 2 miles away. Heaving the handlebars around, I followed the dirt path. Initially, it felt quite pleasant, lumbering along between the trees. The only sounds were the cheeping of birds or the whistle of the wind in the evergreens. The forest floor was still thick with autumn leaves, every colour from pale yellow through coppers and purples to rich mahogany. There were holly bushes, laden with berries, fat and glistening in the pale sunlight. A robin hopped along the bushes beside me for a while. I tossed my hair in defiance at my new neighbour's prediction that I'd be leaving so soon. This was great. I'd grab a coffee, wander around the village, ask in a few shops about any work. Maybe a coffee shop, or no, a tea room would need a waitress. I could sort the cottage out in my spare time, get to know some of the locals, find the key to the Mini. Everything was going to turn out splendidly. If I could only reach Middlebeck, which was seeming more and more unlikely as the last remains of air squished out of my back tyre, and I was now bumping and wobbling along on the rims of the wheels, probably soon to be overtaken by the snail I'd passed earlier. Clambering off, I propped the bike against a large oak tree and continued on foot. Sure, I must have covered 2 miles, and the village would appear just around the next corner. 3 corners later, I saw a gate up ahead, and was it a mirage caused by 15 hours without caffeine? Or could I smell freshly ground coffee? Hurrying through the gate, I emerged into a large clearing. It offered space to park 20 cars or so, several picnic tables, a large notice board displaying a map, and to my joy and relief, a brick building with a sign that read, "The Common Cafe," and a loo. I took a few minutes to wash my face and dab at the worst of the grot on my clothes with a paper towel. Hot water. Bliss! I then scanned the chalkboard menu, displayed beside a hatch designed to serve customers eating outside. "What can I get you?" the young woman on the other side of the hatch asked. I ordered a large Americano and a mega breakfast cob. I wasn't sure what a cob was, but I needed the mega. "Were you here for New Year?" The woman stepped back to throw a sausage onto the griddle. "No, I've just moved here." She twisted back around to look at me, a streaky slice of bacon dangling from her fingers. "Middlebeck? I didn't hear anyone new had moved in." Wow. Mum had warned me it was a place where everybody knew everything about everybody else. How small was the village? Was this clearing Middlebeck? "No, a cottage in the forest." She glanced over my shoulder at the footpath I'd approached from, cracking 2 eggs onto the griddle one-handed. "Charlotte Meadows' place?" Mack never said, but then he wouldn't. I nodded vaguely, pretending to be engrossed in taking the lid off my coffee cup and clicking it on again. Not sure whether to feel pleased, upset, or embarrassed that a stranger in a cafe window had just told me my grandmother's name. "You must like a challenge, taking that on." She grabbed the biggest bread roll I'd ever seen and deftly placed the bacon, sausage, and eggs inside, adding a slice of beef tomato and another of cheese, followed by a squirt of ketchup. "Thanks." I swapped the mega breakfast cob for a handful of coins and took a moment to figure out how to eat it. "You met Mack?" "Hmm?" I said, around a mouthful of salty bacon and a burst of sweet tomato. With a loud gurgle, my shriveled stomach declared this a meal better than any I'd tasted in Edinburgh's fanciest restaurants. "Bit of a mystery man, isn't he? But hey, living so close, maybe he'll crack that rough exterior, succeed where every single woman round here failed." She leant on the counter, gazing off into the distance,
You could start by borrowing his tools, asking him to steady the ladder while you paint the ceiling, or help carry out the old oven. Get to know each other a bit better, if you know what I mean. I'm not looking to know anyone a bit better. Oh. She stood up again and briskly began flicking crumbs off the counter with her cloth. I'll leave you to your breakfast then. No, I didn't mean you. I meant not any men. Not like that. She pursed her lips, still flicking. I panicked, having seemingly offended the first person I'd met, beside the neighbour, Mack, with whom I wasn't exactly off to a good start. I'd like to get to know you better. She raised one eyebrow. Oh? Is that what you tell all the girls? Yes. No, I mean, I don't know anyone here yet. It'd be nice to make some friends. Really? She stared over my shoulder, wisely dismissing me as the social freak I had revealed myself to be. Help, Jenny. This woman seems to know everyone. Pull it back, or the whole village will hear you're bonkers and no one will give you a job. She wants to talk about men. Give her something. Think of some girls' talk. I've just come out of a bad breakup. I spoke louder than necessary, trying to regain her attention. It was pretty hideous. Broken heart, betrayed by a close relative, publicly humiliated, blah, blah, blah. So I'm off men for at least a decade, including my neighbour. Mack, you said? Is that an actual name? She looked back at me, widening her eyes to near circles. Was it working? I was far from fluent in girl. Keep going, Jenny. I know. I suppose he's not bad-looking, underneath the scowling and the chauvinistic wild man of the woods vibe, but I'm not interested in getting to know any men, even if they do have eyes like a steamy mug of hot chocolate. So if Mack likes to keep himself to himself, we'll be perfect neighbours. Good to know. An unmistakable growl came from behind me. I froze, holding up the megacob I'd been using to emphasise the point, like a ventriloquist's puppet. Okay. So the round eyes and strange look were girl for shut up. The man you are simultaneously complimenting and insulting, but in both cases discussing like a hunk of meat, is right behind you. All right, Mack? The woman said, cheeks flaming. I inched around, trying to cover my face with my purchases, keeping my eyes firmly on the ground, so all I saw was a pair of tatty running shoes. I scuttled off. How much did he hear? At the edge of the trees, I glanced back to see Mack, dressed in running gear, being asked if he wanted his usual order. No thanks, Sarah. I suddenly feel in the mood for hot chocolate. Ugh! Breakfast eaten, perched on a tree stump, my humiliation dissolving in the glow of sunshine. I wheeled the bike back to the cottage with renewed vigour, itching to get inside and away from Mack as soon as possible. A search of my shed revealed a small hacksaw, about 10 inches long and not even that rusty, so I got straight to work. 2 hours later, after I'd hacked, chopped, grappled with and stomped on a few of the thinner branches, the blade snapped. I hunted through the shed again, but the only other thing I could find that would be of the slightest use was a spade. Perhaps I could dig a path to the door? It was only a few metres. And that would save time in the long run, as this way the bushes wouldn't grow back. Excellent plan, Jenny. Everything is turning out awesomely. 2 hours after that, as I wrestled a small bush out of the ground, having dug a hole big enough to bury myself in, a prospect more appealing with every aching movement, Mack's back door opened. I quickly picked up the spade again, putting all my fake attention on digging.
Tunnelling your way in?
He stood there, in a grey hoodie and faded jeans, the trainers swapped for thick socks. I ignored how the muscles in his forearms flexed as he leant on the doorframe and crossed his arms. Not interested. Surprised to see me still here? I said, trying not to grunt while attacking another root. His beard twitched. I think that might have been a smile.
You haven't been inside yet?
Something burned hot in my stomach. I'm not a quitter. Not anymore.
Would you like a hand?
Why? Because the quicker I'm in, the quicker I'll be gone? No thanks, I can manage. Really, Jenny? Are you sure about that? Do you want all the blisters on your hand to merge together into one giant festering sore?
How about borrowing my saw?
If I dig the plants out, it'll save me having to do it later.
Except the saw, you stupid stubborn goat.
Maybe, but at this rate you'll be sleeping in the shed again.
His eyes glittered with humour. I said nothing, an internal battle raging between my current loathing of all men and my need to get to the blasted back door before dark. I'm fine. Oh, Jenny, this man is not Richard. Stop acting like a cow. Thank you.
Your choice?
He nodded, once, and went back inside. It was only then I wondered if he was trying to laugh with, not at me. I thought about the rat's eyes, gleaming in the shadows, and promised myself I'd not stop digging until I was in the darn cottage. An hour later, I broke my promise. Exhausted, hungry, fingers numb with cold, feeling slightly deranged at the stress of my predicament, I walked the 45 minutes through the woods back to the cafe, just in time to find Sarah closing up. She topped up my bottle of water, and after I drained it in one, refilled it. I also bought a banana and a slab of chocolate, eating them both on the way back. I returned to find a huge, shiny saw propped up against one of the bushes, which looked decidedly less bushy than when I'd left. Glancing up at the ominous clouds now rolling in across the late afternoon sky, I swallowed the last piece of chocolate, along with my pride, and picked up the saw. The blade snapped off on the second-to-last branch, but as the first drops of sleet began to fall, I had no energy left to worry about that just then. Squeezing my way through the remaining spikes, I finally entered my new home. Chapter 3. Wheezing and gasping, I very quickly stepped out again. I could almost feel Mack laughing through the walls. Gritting my teeth, I leant back around the door and felt for a light switch. As soon as the lights clicked on, I ducked back out, waiting for the scrabbling sounds to die down as whatever lived in there scrambled for cover. I kicked and banged the door a few times, giving them all one last chance to disappear. Took a deep breath of bracing forest air and strode into the centre of what I suppose must be the kitchen. The grandmother I'd heard nothing about until a few weeks ago, Charlotte Meadows, had passed away 6 years earlier. Mum only found out when the lawyers had tracked her down months later to inform her she'd inherited the cottage. Driven by guilt, shame and regret, she'd fled on a journey, both geographical, emotional and, it would seem, spiritual, with a final destination about as far from the self-serving socialite she'd been as it was possible to get. So I'd expected the cottage to need a clean, to have a few mice, spiders, maybe even a bat or two. I knew the roof might be missing a few tiles and was fully prepared to throw on a lick of paint. But seriously, how bad could a house get in 6 years? One look told me this house's problems had started a long time before that. The sink, table, worktops, dresser, and most of the floor were covered in stuff. Pots, pans, plates, mugs, and other kitchen items. Also, 3 metal buckets, books, radios, a guitar case, dozens of empty bottles, and piles of junk. I picked my way over to the fridge, opening the door to release a blast of mouldy air that made my eyes water and throat seize up. Slamming it shut, I pulled my jacket collar up over my mouth and nose and turned towards the oven. The hob was buried under more rubbish, but one glance inside and I had to retreat to the garden and retch a few times. Sneaking over to the outside tap, sticking out of Mack's house, I took a long drink before splashing more water over my face. I desperately needed a shower, but had a feeling that wouldn't be happening anytime soon. The rest of the house turned out to be in much the same state. Every room jam-packed with stuff, only a narrow passage through the hoard leading between the kitchen and the living room, through to what I assumed had once been a dining room, and then to a tiny cloakroom. I didn't think the toilet had been flushed since the last user 6 years ago. More retching, more water, more deep breaths, and wondering how on earth my life had come to this. On the upstairs landing, I found 3 bedrooms, providing sleeping quarters for yet more varieties of animal life in amongst the clutter. Another door revealed the boiler and shelves of sheets and blankets. I wrapped a musty pillowcase around my nose and mouth before opening the final door into what had to be the bathroom. Oh, my goodness. My knees buckled. There was dust, yes, stirred up into clouds of motes shimmering in the evening sunset glowing through the enormous window. A faint hint of mildew, the odd green fleck of verdigris on the copper taps. But stepping into that bathroom was like entering an alternate universe, where things were clean and spacious and white and clean and welcoming and lovely and just clean. Had I died and gone to bathroom heaven? Or was the reality of the bathroom so reeking it had knocked me unconscious, triggering a hallucinogenic dream? Either way, I didn't care. I crossed the wooden floor, leaving footprints in the dust, and peered into the roll-top bath. Nothing a quick swipe with a cloth wouldn't sort out. I opened the window, sat on the closed toilet seat, and wept. I slept in the bath, wrapped up in my sleeping bag. It was marginally more comfortable than the Mini. The shower that had preceded it had been the best 30 minutes of my new life. Too tired for the gnawing in my stomach to bother me, I'd locked the bathroom door to keep out my assorted housemates, and slept for 12 hours straight. The following day, I headed back towards the village, stretching the kinks from my neck and shoulders as I walked. Bypassing the cafe, I carried on along a road for another 1/4 of a mile or so into Middlebeck. After a few big old houses, interspersed with higgledy-piggledy cottages, I arrived at the green, an area of grass circling a pond, surrounded by the village amenities. These consisted of a pub, a quaint little church and village hall, a row of shops, and Middlebeck Primary School. The shops included a general store, bakery, hairdresser, post office, and a Chinese takeaway. Not bursting with potential job opportunities then, but I only needed one. I went to the store first, loading a basket with the barest essentials of cleaning supplies, heavy-duty rubbish sacks, an electric kettle, and various food items that needed no cooking and minimal crockery. Cheese slices, crackers and bread, fruit, tins of tuna, and some packets of instant pasta. A box of tea bags. Counting up the dwindling notes in my purse, I then added a puncture repair kit. I also chucked in a free newspaper, claiming to contain over 70 job ads. I asked in every shop about work, as well as the pub. People were polite, but firm. I'd be better off trying Mansfield or Nottingham. Wandering back to the Common Cafe, I wasted the last of my change on one final coffee and sat in the crisp sunshine to search the paper with a breakfast of apple and cheese. There were 1 or 2 jobs that seemed possible, until I considered the cost of travel, and the timings, and the fact that I would rather starve to death in amongst Charlotte Meadows' horde than ask my previous employer for a reference. I decided the best thing to do was finish my final ever coffee while admiring the view, enjoy the birds soaring overhead, and not think at all about the swanky flat where I'd used to live, the swanky law firm where I'd worked as a personal assistant, the swanky lawyer who I'd assisted a little too personally, or my swanky sister, who'd been the reason I'd moved to Scotland, and the reason I left. While I was busy not thinking about Zara, or Richard, or Zara and Richard, more to the point, a queue began to form at the cafe hatch. It was a Saturday, and a mix of families, ramblers with walking sticks, and dog owners were all either lining up or milling about waiting. After 5 minutes or so, noticing the queue hadn't moved along at all, I walked over to see what was happening. As I approached the building, the door burst open, releasing a small child brandishing a handful of chocolate bars and an egg whisk, closely followed by Sarah. The boy ran past me squealing, and instinctively I reached out and scooped him up. After freezing for a moment in shock, he began beating me with the whisk, screaming whilst his minute yet surprisingly hard feet kicked against my hip. Sarah, wild-eyed and red-faced, pulled up in front of us. "Edison, pack it in!" she commanded. Edison thrashed and bucked. I adjusted my grip,
ducking to avoid a whisk in my eye.
Shall I put him down?
Sarah blew a strand of pale pink hair off one eye and reached out her arms.
I'll take him. He gets like this sometimes. It's not right.
A 4-year-old stuck in a cafe with boiling oil, sharp knives, and shelves full of sweets. A few minutes to calm down will sort him. She grimaced as he stopped struggling, his cries settling into big, jerking sobs.
The problem is, that lot won't wait a few minutes, and neither will them burgers on the grill.
I can help, I said. Sarah lifted her head up.
Are you sure? I can't pay you or anything. How about a mug of soup and another coffee?
She closed her eyes, shoulders dropping 6 inches.
The pennies are in the drawer by the sink.
An hour later, I sat at a bench sipping my soup, watching Edison cavort about the common with a group of boys. The common, I had picked up, was the actual name for this clearing, which explained the cafe's name. These new boys were triplets, judging by the identical copper-brown hair in various states of disarray and 3 pairs of slanted blue eyes. Watching them play together felt like a designer stiletto stomping on my bruised heart. The triplets had arrived with a woman and a man, along with a slightly older girl and a boy around 11, now building a den with fallen branches. It didn't take much earwigging to deduce that this was all one family. I felt overwhelmed just watching them. Once the den stood complete, the younger boys tossed their pretend swords away and scampered inside. They called for their mum to join them, and she persuaded the little girl to go in as well. Once the whole family, and Edison, had squeezed in, the man's head nearly poking out the top, somebody requested a photograph. The woman beckoned me over, saying, "Excuse me, would you mind?" and handed me her phone. Holding the screen up, I took a moment to focus on this gaggle of smiling, windswept faces. The older children, slender like their father, with the same flyaway blonde hair. The mother, beaming as she wrapped strong arms around her wriggling triplets, Edison crouching in front of them. Somebody made a joke at the very second I clicked, capturing the moment the family collapsed into laughter, knocking the den over in the process. At that point, the oldest boy burst into angry tears, shouting and kicking at the fallen sticks. Illusion of perfect family bliss shattered. The man bent down to speak with him, while the mum hurried over to retrieve her phone. "It's gorgeous," I said, showing her. "You have a wonderful family." The stiletto stabbed me once again. She grinned. "Thanks, they keep me busy, but days like today make it all worth it." She tipped her head on one side. "Are you a friend of Sarah's?" I made a willful effort to slam the lid on the ugly box of memories that watching this family had opened in my brain. "I hope so. A new friend, anyway. I moved here a couple of days ago." "Oh, Charlotte Meadows' old place. I heard about that. You're not afraid of hard work, then?" I shrugged. "No. Unfortunately, I am afraid of spiders, rats, mice, and bacterial poisoning. I'm just hoping that somewhere in there a lovely cottage is hiding." At that point, 2 of the triplets rushed up and threw themselves at her, one on each leg. Mum, can we have a cake? 'Cause Dad says if you say we can, then we can, 'cause Dawson won't stop crying 'cause he hates the common and wants to go home." "Hang on, boys, I'm talking." She began untangling them from her skirt. "I better go. Nice to meet you, though. I'm Ellen Cameron." "Jenny." "Bye, Jenny, and sure we'll see you around." Sarah gave Edison a packet of mini crackers to eat while we cleaned up. "Thanks again. It's a nightmare having to bring him to work. I don't know what's worse, risking him running off into the woods or cooping him up within spitting distance of a scalding chip pan." She scrubbed harder at the griddle. "I could kill Sean." "Who?" "Sean, his dad. I'd never say this in front of Edison, but he's a total dud. Usually my mum helps out, but she's gallivanting round the world on a cruise." "And Sean was supposed to watch him?" "Yeah, but of course he cancelled last minute, like a typical dud." "Did he have a good reason?" "That depends. If you think hanging out at the bookies is a good reason to ditch your only child, or going out getting bevied. Maybe he was too busy slobbing in bed. Waster." "Are you together?" "Do I look like a dud?" We reached a deal. I would help Sarah out on Saturdays for the next 3 months, in return for free coffee and all the mega cobs I could eat.
I knew that probably translated as less than minimum wage. But right then, having a friend and proving myself useful felt priceless. And hopefully by the time Sarah's mum returned, I could eat in my kitchen without risk of catching a deadly disease. Chapter 4. I settled into something of a routine over the next few days. Sleeping in a bath was not ideal, even one as luxurious as the one that the bathroom had been endowed with. The growing crick in my neck pushed me to brave clearing out a bedroom. I picked the smallest, on the basis that it had the least stuff to get rid of and the least foul stench. But even my plan to simply relocate most of the contents and sort them later proved pointless. The rest of the house was so chock-a-block that I soon ran out of places to move them to. Some things I could easily bag up and put outside in the complete rubbish pile. Others I was more unsure of, with no one yet phoning me out of the blue and offering me a job, which was how I'd got my previous, and only, so far, employment. I felt all too aware of my empty pockets. Anything that could be sold would be. Afraid of unknowingly throwing out a priceless antique or a cheap bit of tat that might fetch a couple of quid online, I held on to most of the bedroom's treasure, squishing it between random gaps in the stacks. So far, I'd sorted 6 lamps, about 4 million wooden coat hangers, 11 plastic bags stuffed with other plastic bags, crates of assorted glass containers, piles of mouldy linen, and a complete shop mannequin. I dressed the mannequin in a moth-eaten paisley dressing gown to preserve her modesty, and found a spot for her at the end of the hallway. I called her Diana. Besides Sarah, on my twice-daily trips for coffee and then soup or a jacket potato, it turned out my capacity for unlimited megacobs was pretty limited, so Sarah kindly agreed to broaden the scope of my pay. Diana was the only person I'd spoken to in 4 days. There were plenty of mice, woodlice, spiders and moths to shriek, swear and hiss at. But they weren't people. Despite my self-imposed solitude, I could still tell the difference. And Diana almost counted. Mack had disappeared back into his non-abandoned side of the house. Fine by me. I received no messages from the world beyond the forest. This shouldn't have surprised me. I had always been a hanger-on, a shadow, firstly in my family, then more recently in the elite world of Dougal and Duff. And given how things had ended, I could hardly blame my colleagues for not staying in touch. And as for Zara, and her shiny new fiancé, Richard the Richest, well, they had made their choice. I tried not to compare what they had chosen to my current situation, especially not when picking the mould off cheese while sitting on a toilet lid, as this was the cleanest, most hygienic seat in my new home. I didn't at all imagine them dining at the fancy restaurants he'd taken me to, sipping £100 bottles of wine and slurping oysters. Barely crossed my mind. Eventually, the room was empty, save for a large pine wardrobe and a bed. I kept the iron bed frame, but dragged the mattress through the hoard tunnel and into the garden with the rest of the irredeemable rubbish. To my joy and amazement, one of the 8 vacuum cleaners scattered throughout the house actually worked. I ripped up the carpet and took down the curtains, then vacuumed every surface before sucking all the dead insects out of the wardrobe. After scrubbing every surface raw, I left the room to air and decided to celebrate by cycling into Middlebeck to stock up on supplies. Maybe I would happen upon a brand new mattress, discarded by the side of the road, still in its cellophane packaging, or a washing machine, or a fridge. Oh, imagine it, a lovely, shiny, clean fridge, with a little freezer section at the top. As lost as I was in this daydream, it took me a good quarter of a mile of pumping through the trees before I realised the bike was moving a lot faster than usual. Had my ham-fisted attempt at patching up the punctures mysteriously started working 4 days later? Or had all the exercise, humping furniture, carrying boxes downstairs finally kicked in? Stopping at the common, I checked out the tyres. The fat, rock-solid, unworn, brand new tyres. I wiped my glasses on my top and looked again.
Either my fairy godmother had paid a visit, or somebody, no doubt after watching me huffing and straining, red-faced and sweaty through the forest, had taken it upon themselves to replace my tyres. I so wanted to be furious. This was my independent, fend for myself, need no one and trust nobody new start. And who even knew about the bike? I always left it tucked behind the cafe. Either a stranger had been spying on me, then snuck over to the cottage and found the bike in the shed before risking the switch. Or else, someone who wasn't quite a stranger, who knew where the bike was kept, had done it. Mack had fitted brand new tyres on the bike. I now owed him a window, a saw, and 2 tyres. I wondered if he'd take 200,000 coat hangers in payment. Or a lawnmower with no motor. I let out a laugh and pedalled on, unfortunately coming across no household appliances along the way, wondering if I should invest in a padlock now that anyone making off with the bike stood a decent chance of a getaway. I propped it beside the store entrance and hurried around the aisles, sweeping items into my basket. I had rapidly become an expert on what food a person without a kitchen should buy. No to the cheese, yes to the dehydrated soup and noodles that only needed boiling water to be transformed into, and I quote the packet, a delicious, heartwarming and nutritious meal. I thought about the juniper and burnt butter hare I'd eaten in a private dining room overlooking the River Forth. And before I knew it, I found myself next door in the bakery, buying a cream tea. Sitting by the window, I nursed a lukewarm cup of tea and pretended I didn't regret spending a stupid proportion of my remaining pennies on a grey scone covered in strawberry syrup that I felt too depressed to eat. As I prepared to take the plunge, the door to the bakery burst open and Ellen, who I'd met in the forest, came hurtling through, her 3 youngest boys swarming around her skirts. She skidded to a stop at the counter, dumping several bulging carrier bags on the cheap carpet. "Bread, please," she barked, plucking one boy off the nearest table. Another one squeezed behind a display of homemade chutneys. They didn't say they were homemade, but you could tell, and I don't mean that in a good way, causing the tower of jars to rattle dangerously. The third triplet dived under his mum's skirt, lifting it up and pointing 2 fingers in the universally acknowledged gun shape at his brother. "Excuse me?" the woman behind the counter asked, furrowing her brow. The boys drowned out Ellen's reply with their chorus of pows, bangs, and explosions. The one she'd lifted off the table struggled as he tried to turn upside down and pull his mum's skirt up higher. Ellen pointed to a loaf of sagging French bread before calling out, "Cease fire!" The boys instantly froze. A split second later, they all scurried towards the table and sat down. Ellen then asked for 6 donuts to go. By the time the shop assistant had slowly picked up the items with her pastry tongs and put them on a sheet of paper, folded a box out of cardboard, lined it with a doily, carefully placed the donuts inside, managed to close the box and add a sticker to keep it shut, worked out 6 times 65 pence, then started the sum again, including the price of the bread. The ceasefire had ended. Ellen, flicking the curls out of her eyes, grabbed the shopping bags and ordered her children to fall in line. "Soldiers, quick march!" They wouldn't have won any parade medals. As they wriggled, jostled and argued about whose turn it was to go at the front of the line, Ellen herded them towards the door. She paused by my seat, dropping one of the bags. "Jenny, great to see you again." "Was it?" "Hi." She looked at the scone. "Aren't you eating that?" I pushed my glasses back up my nose. No." "Brilliant. I'm having an unexpected in-laws for dinner emergency, and I've not eaten all day." She grabbed the top of my scone and crammed half of it in her mouth, crumbs spraying everywhere. Grimacing, briefly, she then winked, mouth bulging, before resuming the march out of the bakery. "Hup! 2, 3, 4, come on, troops! What comes after 4? I sat and watched her line up the boys to cross the empty road. But as they stepped off the pavement, one of them attempted to go AWOL, his little legs powering down the road. Dropping the bags, which bounced off the edge of the curb, Ellen snatched up the other boy's hands and raced after him.
While she shooed the absconder to the safety of the grass verge, I hurried outside to retrieve the shopping. As I scrambled after the contents, now rolling across the street, a familiar-looking taxi careened out of a side road and headed straight towards me. I scrabbled to get out of the way, but as the car veered to avoid a collision, it ran right over two of the bags, the contents of which exploded in a shower of cream, eggs, passata, and what smelt like vinegar. Nice. I flicked the globules from my hair, smeared the cream off my face, and wondered if it would be okay to eat it. Tezza wound down his window.
Are you a complete idiot, standing in the main road, waggling your backside at unsuspecting drivers? If it weren't for my superior road skills, I'd have hit one of them kids.
Excuse me?
If that shopping has messed up my paintwork, I'll be sending you the bill.
He sneered before screeching off. Ellen bustled over. The boys, bouncing alongside, made no attempt to hide their peals of laughter. I'm sorry. I didn't manage to save most of it.
You're sorry? Ellen shrieked. What if you've been hit by that maniac?
Dinner with Will's parents is not worth risking serious injury or death for. I shrugged. She screwed up her nose and peered at me. Are you always this recklessly selfless? I've been sat in the bakery for 20 minutes, and the only traffic was a mobility scooter. It wasn't quite as fast as Tezza. She nodded. Fair point. Let's get you home and cleaned up, and you can save me from eating the remaining 3 donuts. I accepted her proffered packet of baby wipes and stole a glance at the triplets. Felt the bruise on my heart tremble. Thanks, but I'm fine. You've enough on your plate. I took a step back towards the bakery to retrieve my own shopping. I hope your dinner goes okay. Flicking a blob of sauce off my hand, I pulled open the door. Please come. What? Turning back, I saw Ellen still standing there, clutching at the ruined bags. I'm begging you. No, not quite begging. Strongly inviting you to come and have a decent cup of tea and a donut with me while I decide how I'm going to salvage my family dinner. I couldn't help glancing around. Sure she couldn't be talking to me. Please? She bit her lip, and I realised to my surprise the invitation hadn't come from pity. It's not going to be very nice cycling home in soggy jeans. I wiggled my hips, assessing the damage. All right. She beamed. Hurrah! I haven't had a proper conversation with an adult, other than my husband, in at least a week. I've been buried in prep for my new course. She gestured at herself. Can you believe it? I'm finally going to university. Me! Anyway, I'm not sure I can handle any more questions about man-traps or medical mycology this afternoon. We began walking along the main street, the triplets hopping and climbing walls and spinning along the wide pavement. Sounds like an interesting university course. Eh? Man-traps and mycology? I'm trying to figure out what the course is. If I knew what mycology meant, that'd help. Oh, she grinned. No, that's the kids' questions. I'm training to be a midwife. A whole lot of different questions. Although I did have a boyfriend once who considered pregnancy a man-trap. We followed the boys down a gravel driveway to the Victorian house at the end. It's a lifelong dream, and after giving birth to 5 kids, I'll think I'll be a flipping good one, and I haven't exactly worked out how we're going to manage it yet. After shooing the boys inside, Ellen led me through a tiled hallway full of coats and shoes into the kitchen. A battered oak table stood in the centre, an enormous oven, 2 solid dressers, and rows of open shelving filled the walls. Sit down, I'll put the kettle on. Ellen brushed a pile of crumbs off one of the chairs, and I perched on the edge, trying to make sure none of the food remains on my jeans rubbed off. She kicked a path through the toys to the back door, letting the triplets into the garden, and dashed about chucking dirty pots into the Belfast sink, before rummaging in an enormous freezer. She put a plastic tub in the microwave to defrost, poured the tea, and offered me a donut. You have a lovely house, I said, admiring the walls covered in children's artwork, the pots of herbs lined up on the countertop, and the brightly coloured window seat. It used to be. Lately it feels like the chaos is winning. Chaos? I laughed. You want to see my cottage. Actually, you probably don't. Is it that bad? Worse. Chaos and mess I can live with. Filth and animal infestations have been more of a challenge. I don't know whether to be worried or pleased about not gagging at the stench anymore. Are you sure it's safe to live there? Right now, I don't have any other options. Where were you before? Living with my sister in Edinburgh?
So why tackle the cottage now? It's been empty for years.
I shrugged. I needed to move on. When my mum offered me the cottage, it seemed like the perfect answer. Before Ellen could ask me anything else, the door burst open, and Dawson and his sister ran down the hall, Dawson elbowing his way in front as they approached.
She's lying! I didn't do it! She pushed me first, and then she called me a brain-dead cyberwimp who doesn't even know the genetic code for E. coli, and Austen says he won't walk home with me anymore if she's there, even if he is my cousin, because she didn't shut up the whole way about bacteria and micro things.
Not true! He's lying! He threw my bag over the edge and made me give him my crisps! He said he'd tell Austen I wet my pants in the car if I didn't! Dawson interrupted her. Liar! They carried on arguing at full speed, voices growing louder. Ellen stood up, pushing back her chair and placed one hand on each child's arm.
Excuse me?
Her voice was quiet, but by golly it sent shivers down my spine.
I think we'd better start again.
After another 10 minutes of he said, she said, Ellen wangled an insincere apology from both the children, and they stomped off to other parts of the house. She stood there, hands tugging at her hair. Sorry, Dawson walking Maddie home from drama club was supposed to solve one of my childcare headaches. It's a 5-minute walk with no roads to cross. But Dawson is anxious about me not being around so much, and he's resisting responsibility. I don't blame him. I'm anxious about it. In a couple of weeks, the course properly kicks in, and the nanny I'd hired has taken an au pair job in California with an only child and a swimming pool instead. The back door crashed open, and 3 stick-brandishing 4-year-olds came hollering through, knocking over a chair, stepping on the cat's tail and leaving a trail of mud and leaves behind them. I can't imagine why. Ellen shook her head, righted the chair, and glanced at her watch. Oh, boy. She eyeballed the mess, the uncooked dinner, the mud. It's days like this I wish I had a wife. Sorry, Jenny. I don't mean to be rude, but I really need to press on. Do you mind if we chat while I get things sorted?